Hello, you are watching the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is another daily overview of events and combat operations on the Ukrainian front. Overall, the coming 6 months are expected to be quite tense, and frankly speaking, very intense. However, for us, the key question remains what exactly will happen in Ukraine. It is already obvious that peace is still a long way off. Before we begin, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss future daily updates. Fighting along the front line continues, and as usual, we are carefully analyzing the developing situation. Very little information has been coming in over the past few days. Nevertheless, objective control footage has appeared from several directions. These are precisely the sectors we will examine in detail in today's report. Unfortunately, today's briefing contains not only positive developments, but also unpleasant news. We are talking about confirmed advances by the armed forces of Ukraine. Therefore, I suggest starting with the sector where this advance was recorded. It occurred on one of the most difficult sections of the front at the moment, the Kupyansk direction. I will say right away, slightly looking ahead, that advances on the Kupyansk sector were not limited to the Ukrainian side alone. Russian units have also achieved certain successes, which we will discuss a little later. But for now, let us begin with the Ukrainian advance. Directly inside Kupyansk itself, the situation remains relatively stable. Russian troops are holding their positions in the city. At the same time, there is currently no realistic talk of counterattacks or of retaking previously lost positions. Overall, the situation there can be described as more or less unchanged. However, north of Kupyansk, the situation looks much more alarming. Ukrainian infantry managed to break into Kondrashovka and push Russian units out of several positions at once. The depth of the Ukrainian advance amounted to approximately 1.7 kilometers, possibly even slightly more, and frankly speaking, this is a very negative development. The reasons, I think, are obvious. As we have discussed many times before, the key problem of Kupyansk lies in the vulnerability of its flanks. Along with this come serious logistical problems. In order to stabilize the situation in the city, it is necessary to expand the zone of control north of Kupyansk and push the line of contact farther away from the Oskol River. This would make it possible to organize relatively safe crossings and establish reliable supply routes for Russian units on the right bank of the Oskol, including the right bank part of Kupyansk itself. But instead, we are seeing the opposite picture. The number of problems for the Russian army in this sector is steadily increasing. In December, during a series of counterattacks, the armed forces of Ukraine had already pushed Russian units back in the area of the village of Zapadnoye. Now a similar situation is unfolding in Kondrashovka. In effect, the Ukrainian side is methodically pressing the defenses, forcing Russian troops to gradually fall back toward the Oskol. If Kondrashovka is completely lost, then, using this fairly large village, which is also located on elevated ground, an extremely important factor, the Ukrainian forces will be able to dislodge Russian units from Radkovka. This would further complicate the already extremely difficult logistical situation for Russian troops on the right bank of Kupyansk. Let me remind you that the distance to the Oskol River from there is only about 3.5 kilometers. In fact, the entire area is under constant fire. A natural question arises: how do Russian units even manage to continue holding positions on the right bank of Kupyansk and maintain supply routes across the Oskol? To be honest, this remains a major mystery. Nevertheless, the fact remains, positions in the city are still being held. At the same time, the situation remains extremely difficult, and at the moment there are no visible signs of improvement. However, it is important to clarify that Kondrashovka has not yet been completely lost by Russian forces. Ukrainian units entered the southern part of the settlement and pushed Russian troops back, but Russian positions are still being held in the remaining part of the village. Moreover, I would like to point out another important detail. This has not yet been reflected on the current map, but late last night, fresh objective control footage appeared, showing Russian units advancing west of Kondrashovka. Most likely, cartographers will update this today, and in the next report, we will be able to show this clearly and discuss it in more detail. Thus, on the right bank, we are seeing a 50-50 situation. In some places, Ukrainian forces have pushed Russian units back, while in others, on the contrary, the Russian army has managed to advance. Now let us move to the left bank, and here the picture looks significantly better for Russian forces. We are talking about Kurilovka. Pay attention to the scale of the advance, from the eastern part of the village to the western part. The advance through residential areas amounts to more than 3 kilometers. It was precisely from this area that objective control footage had previously emerged. At the current moment, it can be stated that Russian units have managed to take control of the part of Kurilovka located on the northern bank of the Lazavatka River. At the same time, fighting for the settlement is still ongoing. If Kurilovka is eventually fully pressed through, and I would say not if, but when, given the general weakening of Ukrainian defenses, then the next logical stage will be Kupyansk-Uzlovoy. Overall, in my view, one of the key objectives for 2026 will be the elimination of the Ukrainian bridgehead on the left bank. I already spoke about this in the episode where we analyzed the goals for 2026. As long as such a situation persists, it is simply impossible to speak of creating a reliable bridgehead on the right bank. And we are now seeing clear confirmation of this. The Russian army is developing its success in Kurilovka. Fighting continues for Petropavlovka. Next in line will be Kupyansk-Uzlovoy. Only after this area is cleared will it be possible to seriously talk about forming stable flanks for full control directly over Kupyansk. What else happened on the front over the past day? Another area of advance was recorded in the Dnipropetrovsk region near Novopavlovka. Here, units of the center grouping managed to slightly improve their positions, advancing toward the settlement by approximately 1 kilometer. Overall, there is not much more to add here. Fighting for the village continues, as do clashes on its approaches. In the near future, the task is to clear the resulting pocket. Next, we move on to the active sectors of the Zaporizhzhia direction, specifically the area of Novoyakovlevka. Units of the Dnipro grouping continue their steady advance west of Orikhiv. After the breakthrough, Russian troops are advancing along the Ukrainian defensive line, which runs south of Stepnohursk and then bends southwest around the Orikhiv fortified area of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is reported by military analyst Yuri Podolyaka. After taking Lukyanovskoye, Russian units, attacking from the flank, managed to capture several Ukrainian strongpoints to the east at once and reached the southwestern outskirts of Novoyakovlevka, initiating fighting for this strategically important settlement. Thus, the Russian army is advancing along this defensive line both from the north and from the south, with the general direction toward Yurkovka. Control over this line is of critical importance for future battles for Orikhiv. Using, among other things, dominant high ground, Russian units, and especially drone operators, will be able to completely block the supply of the local Ukrainian grouping, which will ultimately lead to the capture of this important city on the road to Zaporizhzhia. The Huliaipol sector. Here, Russian forces continue to develop their offensive deeper into the defensive lines of the armed forces of Ukraine. Northwest of Filia, units of the Russian armed forces are advancing beyond the Solyona River. Attacks on Zheleznodorozhnoye are also continuing. In the Pokrovsk direction, Russian troops have established control over the territory of 2 farms along the road leading to Hryshine. Successes have also been recorded in eastern settlements. West and southwest of Rodinske, intense fighting continues. Russian aviation is striking Ukrainian positions with FAB aerial bombs. Ukrainian forces are conducting counterattacks on the western outskirts of Suvarovo and Sukhetskoye. Russian forces are storming Belitske and Novyi Donbass. Northwest of Oktyabrskoye and Shakovo, Russian units are fighting for refractory ore quarries and the adjacent wooded areas. The Sloviansk-Kramatorsk direction. The Russian army is advancing west of Siversk. There have been successes in the western part of Reznikovka, and the zone of control over the heights dominating the village has been expanded. The Lyman sector. Russian troops are pushing Ukrainian forces west of Krasny Lyman in the area of the Starodubovskaya Dam. Along the railway line, units of the Russian armed forces are breaking through towards Sosnovoye and the Sviatohirsk station. The Russian army approached Yarovaya simultaneously from the northwest and the northeast. Fighting is ongoing for a strongpoint, as well as for the southeastern roads in the area of Korovy Yar, the Sumy border area. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that Horobovskoye has been taken under control. 3 kilometers to the north lies the settlement of Vysokoye, control over which was established back on December 20th. 12 kilometers west of Horobovskoye runs the highway connecting Sumy and Kharkiv. If this route is cut, the armed forces of Ukraine will face serious logistical problems in the border areas. For now, Russian units continue advancing toward the neighboring settlement of Ryaznoye. Overall, this concludes the frontline portion of today's report. Now let us turn to developments on the political stage. It is reported that Nicolas Maduro was delivered to a court in New York under the escort of special forces. The president of Venezuela was transported by helicopter and armored vehicles under the protection of special units. Maduro stated that he does not plead guilty to the charges brought against him in the United States and considers himself a prisoner of war. According to him, he was allegedly seized in his own home in Caracas. He emphasized that he considers himself innocent and a decent person. Maduro's lawyer informed the court that the defense would later seek his release on bail. However, no such motion has been filed at this time, according to Fox News. The judge ordered Nicolas Maduro to appear in court for a hearing on March 17th. Maduro and his wife Cilia left the New York courtroom under escort by the U.S. Marshals Service. At the same time, according to Bloomberg, the trial on the merits may not begin before 2027. At the current hearing, only the schedule for the exchange of evidence at the preliminary stage was approved. It is worth noting that this same federal court previously heard the cases of Donald Trump and Victor Bout. Direct television broadcasts from the courtroom are prohibited, and it is still unclear whether any exception will be made for Maduro. Meanwhile, Donald Trump made a number of high-profile statements. He commented on Mexico and a possible U.S. operation against Colombia, calling such an idea not a bad one. According to him, Colombia is also very sick and is run by a person who produces illegal substances and sells them to the United States. When asked to clarify whether a U.S. military operation against Colombia was possible, Trump replied that he considers it justified, stating that they are killing people. He also once again hinted at possible actions against Mexico, saying that something must be done because a massive flow of people is entering the United States through Mexico. According to Trump, Mexico is capable of restoring order, but this is hindered by the excessive power of the cartels. Separately, it is worth highlighting a serious blow for Volodymyr Zelensky and the British side. This concerns the dismissal of Malyuk, who has been designated in Russia as an extremist and terrorist. He has been removed from his position. It is reported that Malyuk was also involved in the situation surrounding Mindich's departure, but this is not the real reason for his dismissal. Earlier reports had already indicated that Trump intends to place his own people in key structures. Previously, the entire escalation component had been ensured by the Security Service of Ukraine and Malyuk personally. This includes Operation Web, the elimination of Russian generals, and strikes on the so-called Shadow Fleet. Indirect confirmation of this is the fact that not only Malyuk is leaving, in effect, the entire British team is preparing to depart. Thus, Trump is carrying out a quiet and gradual cadre revolution, surrounding Zelensky with people who will formally be subordinate to him, but will already be guided by how their actions or inaction are assessed by the future U.S. administration. At the same time, Trump does not yet have a fully formed cadre asset of his own, and those who attempt to mimic loyalty to him may in fact be a hidden resource of the globalists. In addition, reports indicate the return of former Foreign Minister Kuleba, who is also considered an asset of the globalist camp, including Soros-linked structures. In the coming days, the U.S. Senate is expected to put to a vote a resolution that would effectively limit Donald Trump's freedom of action with regard to Venezuela. There is a real chance that the document will be adopted, according to Oleg Saryov. The resolution in question is a bipartisan war powers measure aimed at prohibiting the U.S. administration from continuing any military actions against Venezuela without separate and explicit approval from Congress. The authors of the initiative are Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, Senators Tim Kaine and Adam Schiff, as well as Republican Senator Rand Paul. The document is extremely strict in nature. It bans not only ground combat operations without congressional authorization, but also any strikes on Venezuelan territory or against related targets. This includes attacks on vessels, both those allegedly linked to cartels and civilian fishing boats. Special operations involving the abduction of Venezuelan leaders would also be prohibited. In addition, the resolution provides for a ban on the interception of ships, a naval blockade of Venezuelan exports, and the closure of Venezuelan airspace. It is precisely out of fear of such a scenario, observers believe, that Trump carried out strikes against Venezuela while Congress was in recess. I have spoken about this before. The document is being introduced under a special procedure established by the War Powers Act. This procedure guarantees that the resolution must be brought to a floor vote. Senate Republican Majority Leader John Thune does not have the ability to delay or block the consideration process. The resolution is being formulated as a joint resolution, meaning it must pass both chambers of Congress. First, a vote will take place in one chamber, then in the other. The final version of the document must match word for word. In the Senate, the prospects for adoption of the resolution are considered quite real. In the House of Representatives, the situation is more complicated. In December, a similar resolution narrowly failed there by a margin of 201 votes in favor to 213 against. At that time, the Trump administration avoided defeat thanks to one Democrat and a group of dissident Republicans who sided with the White House. Now the administration intends to do everything possible to preserve this fragile margin, although it will be extremely difficult. According to members of Congress, ahead of the vote, Marco Rubio personally tried to persuade senators that no bombing of Venezuela was allegedly planned, in an attempt to reduce support for strict limitations on the administration's actions.